Hello, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, and the public. My name is Adam Smith with the City Manager's Office here with a item titled Reconsideration of Successor Agency and Oxnard Housing Authority properties in the Meta Street area. The recommendation is that the Board of Commissioners of the Oxnard Housing Authority, or the OHA, upholds their October 5th, 2021 agreement with the successor agency to purchase 4 successor agency properties located along Meta Street in the downtown. The second recommendation is for the Oxnard Community Development Commission successor agency also uphold their October 5th, 2021 decision to enter into the sale agreement with the OHA for those 4 properties along Meta Street. If the October 5th, 2021 decision is not upheld, staff is requesting direction from council, successor agency, to return to committee to consider the parcels, these 4 parcels, as either exempt surplus land, subject to the agency's use, or B, surplus land, subject to future affordable housing through the State Department of Housing and Community Development. And in subsequent slides, I'll go through the Surplus Land Act. Finally, the final recommendation is for 2 additional successor agency properties also located along Meta Street in the downtown for council successor agency to provide direction to staff to either declare these properties as exempt surplus land or surplus land. Summarizing this report in this presentation, back on October 5th, 2021, staff presented incomplete and incorrect information to the successor agency and the OHA for these properties in the Meta Street area. Questions were raised about the properties that were not part of the October 5th action. And despite the incorrect information, staff recommends that the successor agency and the OHA uphold their October 5th, 2021 decision and still enter into the purchase and sale agreement, or the PSA, for those 4 successor agency-owned properties to support affordable housing, and also to provide direction to return to committee regarding the 2 additional properties that are owned by the successor agency. So the Surplus Land Act is what governs these properties at this point. What the Surplus Land Act seeks to do is improve the process to provide notice of surplus land that local agencies own for affordable housing purposes. Most recently, council declared 53 properties throughout the city as surplus at their February 1st, 2022 meeting. Any land that is not necessary for the agency's use must be declared surplus prior to the disposition of land. Agency's use is defined as land that is used or planned to be used for the agency or the city, their own work or operations. Now, land that is open space or recreational would be considered an agency's use. On November 14th of 2017, council authorized an agreement with HCD for grant funds to fund park facility improvements. And they also authorized approximately $278,000 in Measure O funding for the possible purchase of properties, understanding that this affordable housing opportunity will need to identify a replacement site and denote the replacement units in 2018 before the current site can be used for a park. The funding was for the parcels that the successor agency authorized the OHA to purchase on October 5th, 2021. And the purpose of that sale agreement was for the development of affordable housing in line with the city's housing element. However, in January 2020, the Measure O Citizen Oversight Committee recommended that the funding that was allocated for land acquisition in the 5 Points neighborhood, which is where these properties are situated along Meta Street, the Oversight Committee recommended that that funding be removed. And on February 18th, 2020, Council took action to remove funding for that acquisition of land. Here are the remaining successor agency parcels. This has been a long time coming since redevelopment ended in 2011. The city started with about 51 properties, and now we're down to the final 7 listed here, 1 through 7. The properties that were subject to the purchase and sale agreement between the successor agency and the OHA are notated with numbers 2, 3, 6, and 7, which was approved back on October 5th. And then the additional properties are properties numbers 4, 5, which we will refer to as the additional properties. For properties 2, 3, 6, and 7, the successor agency has been wasn't an exclusive negotiating agreement with the OHA starting in November of 2020. And on December of 2020, the State Department of Finance approved the ANA, which allowed staff from successor agency and the OHA to begin to negotiate the terms of a sale agreement for these properties 2, 3, 6, and 7. On September 14th, 2021, the Community Services, Public Safety, Housing and Development Committee recommended approval of the PSA. And the PSA was derived from negotiations during that ENA period. And then finally, on October 5th, 2021, the successor agency and the OHA bodies both approved the sale agreement. So here they are again, numbers 2, 3, 6, and 7 for affordable housing purposes. Now, staff is recommending that the successor agency and the OHA uphold that decision to enter in that purchase and sale agreement, which will ensure development of affordable housing units in the city consistent with the city's housing element. If that action is upheld, that recommended action is upheld, staff will return to council and the OHA before the December 29, 2022 deadline to satisfy all conditions, including escrow, and to authorize and to receive approval to execute a grant agreement between the city and the OHA to purchase the properties. Now, for those additional successor agency properties, that was numbers 4 and 5, staff provided incorrect information regarding what the options were. At that meeting in October of 2021, the only option that staff gave the successor agency was that the properties had to be declared surplus, which would offer them up through the State Housing and Community Development Department to developers for affordable housing development. But in reality, the successor agency had a second option, which is number 1 here on this slide, which is the successor agency could actually declare either or both of these parcels as exempt surplus, as defined earlier in this presentation, which would allow for agency's use. And like I said earlier, agency's use is or would be considered agency's use if the properties were eventually used for open space or recreational uses. So here are those additional properties, 4 and 5, along Menna Street in downtown Oxnard. There's a few documents that are guiding what the city does with its parks. I know it's open spaces, both public and private. The first is the Oxnard Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which seeks to guide decision-making for development and management of the city's parks and recreational facilities, open spaces. Now, the neighborhood of 5 Points, where these properties, the subject properties, are situated, the Parks Master Plan identifies that neighborhood, 5 Points, as the city's most significant gap in park acres per 1,000 residents, with less than 1 acre per 1,000 residents. The master plan goes on to state that the city should consider acquiring some of the vacant lots in these areas to develop into parks when and if resources become available. On the other hand, it also states that the city has a difficult time managing its existing parks, and the city should focus on funding improving what they already have. Finally, the master plan states that the city should consider privatized parks or open spaces as a way to increase the amount of park space the city can maintain. However, developing a park in 5 Points has some concerns, including the continuous lack of open space for recreational activities, as well as existing challenges in the Parks Division of Public Works in terms of maintaining existing parks with financial and staff resources currently available. The Downtown Code, which was adopted in 2019, this also implements the city's development and uses of individual lots and buildings in the downtown area, including Meta Street, where the subject properties reside. Now, what the code helps to do is to lay the foundation for the creation and standards of both public and private open spaces within the downtown. A public open space requirement was incorporated into the code in July of 2019, and this was designed to function as a comprehensive public open space system that supports various mixed-use places. Basically, when larger developments come into the downtown, there is a minimum public space that has to be provided. And here is a table that shows, depending on the development size, what percentage of that development needs to be devoted to public space. So if you have a development that's 20,000 square feet up to 2 acres, minimum of 7% of that development needs to be public open space. And then if you get into even larger developments, greater than 2 acres, minimum of 10% of the development needs to be devoted to publicly accessible open space. So there's one new project in the downtown. It's called Aspire Apartments, which will be coming online. Will provide public open space maintained by the private owner in line with the downtown code. Now, this public open space component is in addition to the private open space that will be provided to the residents that will eventually live at the project. But the public component will be approximately 5,600 square foot public pocket park. And the actual purchase and sale agreement for this public pocket park, which is also owned by the Successor agency, is on Council's July 28th agenda as well. The future affordable housing project for the properties would also require open space maintained by the private property owner. And when I say the properties, I mean the OHA properties, numbers 2, 3, 6, and 7, that were subject to the purchase and sale agreement between the OHA and the Successor agency. Here's a rendering of the, let me just go back one slide. So the public pocket park, the 5,600 square foot development that will eventually come online is rendered right here. So you have the affordable housing development on the top of this rendering in yellow, and then on the bottom is that public pocket park. You can see there's a nice walking path, some tables, there's going to be some gym equipment, a few barbecues, and this will be publicly accessible and will be in the 5 Points neighborhood, which currently doesn't have a lot of options for open space or recreation. Now, the Parks Commission on January 26th of 2022, they discussed the very need for open space and for the residents in 5 Points, and they actually identified the additional properties, which is properties 4 and 5, as potential future locations. The Parks Commission has understood the Public Works Parks Division concerns on the challenges with maintaining city parks, as mentioned earlier, and but the commission still recommended that staff continue to research options for the acquisition of property due to just the limited availability of open space land in the 5 Points neighborhood. Subsequently from that, on May 25th, 2022, the Parks Commission approved a formal recommendation to Council to allocate sufficient Measure O, Measure E, or general fund monies for the purchase and basic improvement of the additional properties to create recreational green space in the 5 Points neighborhood, and then reserve Quimby funds for the development of a park. Now, Quimby funds are funds paid by developers to municipalities in lieu of constructing new parks. Quimby funds cannot be used for the maintenance of a park. They cannot be used to replace existing park amenities like trash cans or benches. It can only be either for new equipment, new parks, or anything that could increase access to a park. As of May 2022, there's approximately $1.25 million available in Quimby funds for the 5 Points neighborhood. Getting into what it costs to construct a park, it usually generally starts at around $1 million per acre and increases based on that added amenities, such as restrooms, hardscapes, lighting, etc. Cost for the actual construction and maintenance of a new park is always subject to its design and size. Shifting to the financial impact regarding the OHA and successor agency recommendation, which is 1 and 2I, to uphold their October 5th, 2021 recommendation. As mentioned in that staff report and in that purchase and sale agreement, the agreed upon price for those 4 properties was $213,000 per the redevelopment dissolution law, which the successor agency operates under. The city's general fund, which is a taxing entity, and the county would potentially receive approximately $42,000 or about 19% of the sale proceeds. Then we would go through the ESCO requirements after we got formal approval, and we would return back to council and the OHA before the December 29th, 2022 escrow deadline to satisfy all conditions, and then prepare an agreement to purchase the properties. Now, if the October 5th, 2021 decision was not upheld, staff would, and instead staff was directed to declare these 4 properties as exempt surplus land, staff would then come back to committee with information on additional costs for a potential prospective design, construction, maintenance of future open space on the property. That would be with doing away with the existing purchase and sale agreement and instead declaring these properties exempt surplus land. Another option, if staff was directed to instead do away with the purchase and sale agreement and instead declare these properties as surplus land, then we would do that surplus land declaration, and the properties would be subject to affordable housing through the State Department of Housing and Community Development. Now for the additional properties numbers 4 and 5, and this is a property that staff originally said that the only option was to declare them surplus subject to affordable housing. If instead the successor agency directed staff to declare them exempt surplus, we would come back to committee with an exempt surplus land act declaration for those 2 properties. The value of the property at this time would still need to be determined, but the value from the 2015 broker opinion and value that we currently have is approximately $123,000. And again, staff would also return with information on the cost that would be needed for design, construction, and then ongoing maintenance of future open space on these additional properties. If staff was instead directed to pursue affordable housing on the additional properties, we would come back to committee with a surplus land act declaration and declare those properties as surplus land. Then the properties would be subject to affordable housing. Finishing off the recommendation is that the Oxnard Housing Authority upholds their October 5th, 2021 decision to enter into that purchase and sale agreement with the successor agency for those 4 successor agency owned properties for affordable housing purposes. And likewise, the recommendation is that the successor agency also upholds their October 5th, 2021 decision to enter in that purchase and sale agreement for the 4 properties. Now, if that decision was not upheld, staff would request direction to either declare the properties as exempt surplus, subject to the city's use, or surplus, which would subject these properties to future affordable housing in the city. For the 2 other successor agency owned properties, the additional properties, staff is requesting direction on whether to declare them exempt surplus subject to the city's use, or surplus, subject to affordable housing use. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.